Eva, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we will have an energy talk about the complexity of human beings.
Yes.
And especially about being highly sensitive and being introverted.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm excited to talk about.
Oh, me too. Very, very
topics.
much. So, could you tell me when did you hear or read about being highly sensitive the first time, and did it immediately resonate with you?
Yeah, so for me it was really many years ago when it was definitely not a topic yet. I had a mentor early on in my career, and she just, as it often happens, she kind of said, you should be looking into this. And this topic, I didn't know about it, and then I came across the website from Elaine Aron, who I think is the who had originated that idea. And she has this quiz on her website, which asks you all the questions about sensitivity. And I recognized myself in most of these questions. So that's then when a term that really stayed with me. And so, as it often is, somebody sees something in you and gives you that idea, and then it stays with you. Yeah. And I think that's also how we met each other, right? Via being HSPs.
That's right. Yes. That's right. And you mentioned Elaine Aron, and she has written many books about this topic. And one of the books I read in 2002, and it's called The Highly Sensitive Child. Yeah. So when I was reading that book, I had a pencil in my hand and I was underlining sentences because I recognized so much in this book, and I was making notes in the book. And then afterwards, I just put it away because at that time I was a student, and I just parked it, and continued with my life. So high sensitivity just popped up again when I was working as a coach for, 5 or 6 years already. And then someone asked me to write some articles about high sensitivity. And the crazy thing is that at that point, I didn't even realize that I was highly sensitive.
I was going to ask, so you read The Highly Sensitive Child, but did you recognize it as when you were a child, or did you just, it resonated?
Yes, it resonated completely, but somehow I didn't conclude then I must be a highly sensitive person. Yeah. And I also thought of my little sister, Yeah. So, but I think these things just happen in steps. On the way, it just gets a place in my subconscious. And the moment that someone asked me to write some articles about it, I thought, this is interesting. The clients I see, they could match this.
Yeah, it's like you build your awareness around it, right? So it resonates and then it stays with you, and then you're like, okay, so you build your awareness, you see it in others, you notice it more in yourself, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting. Yes. So what are the characteristics of being a highly sensitive person resonate with you?
I think, the way I would describe it is kind of you are a little bit, or I am a little bit, I find a barometer, you just notice subtle changes the earlier on than other people do.
And do you mean in terms of emotions and energies?
Yeah, for example, you engage with a person and you kind of have a baseline of how that person typically behaves, and then you notice how there's something different, right? And then you get curious about that, and to not immediately also categorize, but then, how you're doing, and so you establish a baseline, and then you notice subtle changes, or also in group settings, right? What's the energy of a group, or also, and energy can also change throughout a meeting, or throughout encountering, being in a social setting, and so it's very much noticing subtleties and nuances in how things shift in the energy, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that how you would categorize it as well?
Well, this is typically something that I also have, as a highly sensitive person, but I also got that back a lot from other highly sensitive people.
Yeah.
And I think the fascinating part of noticing all these subtleties in changing emotions or energies, behavior, is, do we do something with it, or do we just let it slide by? Of course, that depends on how we feel that day, the circumstances, the context in which we are. But it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Elaine Aron also talks about it. It's like 20% of the population that, I mean, it's a fifth, so it's not uncommon. And then also that you basically have higher awareness of your surroundings or of certain things. And then, of course, do you do something with it is like also because you can get overstimulated, right? If you take more in from the outside world, then you also have to protect yourself in that way of not every information can be or should be information that needs to be carried forward in a way.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. And how do you deal with that? So was that one of your challenges, being a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, I mean, overstimulation, I think, is the challenge, right? So you take on more of the world, and then it's about just finding out what the signals are when that happens, and giving yourself the space to. And it's really just about finding a balance. So for me, I think a lot of people struggle with this is like sleeping. So when either not being able to fall asleep or waking up in the middle of the night, like at 3 a.m, and your mind is just processing something. So if you do not have enough time or to process during the day, then that's what the thoughts that keep you awake at night. So I think then you learn, or I had to learn then basically that's a signal that, take some space, give yourself some time out, rebalance. And so just to find those balances and what the signals are.
Yes, and especially to take the time to process the things that have happened during the day, right? And that you need really time to, rethink what people have said, how the reactions were to what people have said, and their feelings. Yeah, it's amazing. And there's another part which sometimes drives me crazy. That's feeling lots of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Like when many good things on one particular day have happened during the day, like good news from my daughter, good news from my friends, or I went through some interesting developments, and then I'm like, I don't know how to get to sleep, and I really have troubles falling into sleep. But also the nights are shorter. Like I wake up and like, oh my God, I have a podcast today with Eva. I'm looking forward to it. Oh.
Yeah, and so you're saying there is such a thing as too much of a good thing, right?
Yes, it's too much of a good thing.
How can we not spread this one wonderful day into like 5 wonderful days into pieces? But life happens that way, Yes. And I think for me, there's also like writing is a big element for me. I don't know if you write as well, but basically when there's too much on my mind, like that really then helps me structure the thinking and structure the thoughts and put it, because in your mind, if you never give it room, then it may just circulate, and overthinking is not healthy, right? So for me, sometimes also then just the element of writing things down forces me to structure the thinking and so on, and then also let go. So I typically don't write for reading. I write for just structuring the thought and then being able to let go, and that's a process that works for me as well.
Writing definitely helps.
Yes.
Yeah, I have been writing in my diary since I was 8.
Yeah.
So it definitely helps. But do you do it on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I just started this again. There's these journals, the 5-year journals, where you just write a paragraph every day. And I just started that some month ago again. And I did that some years ago, and it's really interesting because then you have one day, 5 years in a row. So the next year you read that day from the year before.
Oh, from the year.
From last year. So it's basically 5 years you do it. And so I started that again because it was a very interesting process of really then knowing what happened on that same day a year ago, 2 years ago, or 5 years ago. So I just restarted that. And so that I do daily again. But other than that, I write whenever I feel like writing or need to write, or it comes and goes? How about you? Do you write daily?
Yeah, well, I've also picked that up recently.
Yeah.
It comes and goes in phases. Like sometimes
exactly.
I do. I am now in the phase that I need it. Yeah, and it also has to do with some creative projects, like book ideas, and then I think of a story and I'm like, oh, this is a really good part for that book, and if I don't write it down, I forget.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's actually the creative process part in which I use writing, but also to reflect on the day or write down how grateful I feel for the things that are happening right now, and that really helps me calm down. Also to lower the sensation of adrenaline in my body.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think Brené Brown is the one that I heard first talk about this term of thinking about thinking. Right? And I think like writing, having a gratitude journal, for example, is a way of like, well, what are the things that I'm grateful for today? So I do that as well, because it's very easy to fall into, well, this didn't go right and that didn't go right, but really then to like, well, there's a lot of good things going as well, and then really just thinking about those things and to not let them drown in the noise of whatever is not going right. So that's. But I also liked her term of thinking about thinking, right? Because it's very easy to fall into, well, I didn't do this right, or I forgot to do that, or I made a mistake. But then really also to also counterbalance that with positive things about that are going well, and not forgetting about those.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, because it surpasses the critical thinking mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also that we have a choice in shaping how we think about things, right? So restructuring when things are not going well, and that's the only thing you think about. But then really to think about thinking, and also, well, I'm reminding myself also of the good things as well. It really helps.
Yeah, it definitely helps.
Yeah.
And also because it's a physical activity.
Yeah,
yes. There's a difference between writing with the hand and typing it on my laptop. I've noticed.
I do think that is for most people. I always have a notebook and I always write by hand. And also because it's not even, do you reread your journals? Because I don't.
Hardly, because somehow I don't feel I have the time. I really need to make time to reread what I've written down. Yeah,
because for me it's also not the point of it, right? Yeah. Because once I write it down, it's almost, I memorize it already because of the act of writing.
Oh, and then it's
a lot of times.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, because then that's the structuring of the thoughts, right? As long as I'm just ruminating over something, then, but having to write it down, because you think faster than you write, right? So writing it down really forces you to sharpen the narrative almost, because it's very easy to think about things. But writing it down, then so the writing most of the time is not for rereading. It's just for the process of writing.
Yeah, almost. The process of writing, and to restructure the way you think.
Or structure it to begin with, right? Because thoughts can also go very unstructured if you let them.
That's right.
But so... And maybe that comes also from, I have 2 degrees, one is in engineering and one is in science. And so just being structured is also part of me, right? And that's also a side of the complexity of, you can be an HSB, but you can also have an engineering degree. It's not necessarily 2 things that people put together, I don't think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Many times when you think of highly sensitive people, like they are the people who are visual thinkers, the artists, the people who design. You find highly sensitive people in many areas in life. In many
walks of life,
yes.
Yeah,
and like coming back to being highly sensitive, because we are sensitive because of our senses. So when you think of your senses, which of your senses are like really, really well developed?
Yeah.
1 or 2, or like all of them are well developed?
Yeah, I think communication and reading and writing and listening and language that's kind of my thing, I'd say. So the process of writing, how we communicate, active listening.
Yes.
I think anything around language is really something that really resonates with me. And yeah, how about you?
So that brings it down to like your hearing capabilities are very well developed, right?
Yeah,
like
I think so.
it's a combination of looking and hearing.
Yeah, and just listening carefully and asking follow-up questions. Like the term active listening comes to mind, right? Where you really have that conversation with somebody like yourself, and then we build upon each other. And we're instead of, which often happens when I say something and you say something, and we just trigger thoughts, but we're not talking with each other. So to just so active listening kind of deepens the conversation. In we're talking with each other. So and listening is a very important element of communication. Sometimes undervalued, right, in a world that likes to talk.
That's right.
So we like our sending bandwidth sometimes is higher than our receiving bandwidth. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, in terms of my senses, I smell a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could also be distracted if I smell something which is not smell. How do you put that? Like,
so basically, you have a more refined sense of smell.
Yeah, more refined sense of smell, and that goes together with the sense of taste. And I think that brings me also back to my Chinese background, that I grew up within a family in which food was very important. So I think it also, this leads us back to when you're born as a highly sensitive person within a family, within a culture and a country, that how the environment was and how the caretakers were, it really helps outbring all these senses of you as a person, or it doesn't help you in any way, to live from these senses. It's interesting to think about that.
Well, because every strength can also become a weakness, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like overdoing something is never the right way to go, right? Overusing a sense is then maybe you are at the then you're not using other senses that also you need. I don't know, is that?
Yeah. Well, that's a part of it, but I think the most important part of where I was going to is that when you are brought up in a family in which you were maybe the only one being highly sensitive, then people don't really notice like what your capabilities are. Yeah, and they don't provide the stimulation that you need.
So it's not recognized because other family members or friends
because they don't have
it. They don't
have it, or they don't have the space and the ability to see it. That what the child needs. And now I'm thinking of a case like a person who is highly sensitive and highly gifted, and when she was a child, she got bored quite quickly, with the toys that she had. And the parents really didn't saw it, as a sign. They were like, you have toys, just play with the toys you have, but it not like, she's bored, she knows how it works and she needs more stimulation with other types of
basically she was learning at a faster pace. So the parents were like, you have those toys, but she was understimulated because she's like, I have experienced these toys, I need to learn faster.
And that's super interesting that people develop in a way, and then suddenly in adulthood you see yourself as an introvert or extrovert or ambivert, and or maybe high sensation seeker. And it could be even so that you see yourself as a high sensation seeker because now you can give yourself the stimulation that never has been given to you when you were a child, right? Because now you're like, oh no, I have to go out and I have to do things and see the world.
I've done skydiving once and I'm not a high sensation seeker.
You're not a high sensation seeker.
No, because, well, maybe in other elements, right? It depends on how you define it. But so you do this tandem skydiving, and so you don't jump by yourself. You jump with somebody. But that person was, because then his story was so interesting in how he was always bored and he became that, doing these tandem jumps as his job. And he did multiple a day, and I'm like, and then in the winter he goes to another place. It was in the US, so it was in Houston. He's like, in winter he's in Houston, and in summer he goes up north. And I was just like, wow. I mean, I was like, once, this is good enough. It was quite the experience. But so I know what you mean by high sensation seeker. Yes. That person resonated with me, of like, to make this your job is quite something. Yeah,
it's quite something. Yeah. And of course we look for the jobs that fits us as a human being. So speaking of which, like, we were talking about being introvert and extrovert and ambivert. How would you identify your personality as a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, I'm certainly an introverted person. Also, all the tests would suggest so, that you can take on the internet. And I think that often surprises people, because I'm introverted but I'm not shy. And these are two different things, right? So introverted, how I define it, which I think overlaps with being an HSP a little bit. So introverted is just, how do you get your energy? Do you get your energy when you're around people, or do you get your energy or restore your energy when you spend time in solitude or with just fewer people? And so this is kind of like, naturally, I have no issue being around people. I'm also not shy, so I don't struggle with speaking up or presenting, or but then I need those restorative times, and that's kind of how I think, for me at least, the introverted extroverted is. Is that how you define it as well, or?
Yes, for sure, and especially the characteristic that you mentioned, that you're like quiet, but you're not shy. You like being alone, and you need time to recharge. And but you're not shy, and we're speaking, and it's fantastic, to hear you speak as an introverted person, because I think it sheds light on the topic, on all these different personality traits.
And the nuance of it. It's really funny on how often I get challenged on that, where people are really surprised when I said I'm quite introverted, as in, like, for me, COVID was like, I rediscovered solitude. And it just...
But in a good sense.
In a very good sense. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely, right? I'm not lonely, and I think it's important to... I think everybody benefits from a little bit of time by themselves, and then, basically, it doesn't bother me one bit. But also, I can be the life of the party. It's not my preference to be the life of the party. And I think that's the distinction, right? So sometimes I have been challenged in this, where people are very surprised when I call myself an introvert, because they see me around people and I can talk to people, and I have no issue with that. But, then they don't see me when I'm not, right? So, and then I spend a lot of time also not being around people and in solitude, or, it's also like, I prefer smaller groups over larger groups. And so, but I think that distinction between shyness and introvertedness is an interesting one. I don't know if that's how you experience this as well, or...
I see myself as an ambivert.
Okay,
so that's a combination of being introverted and extroverted, but I lean more towards introverted. And I think people see me also in different contexts, so I can be, as you have put it, the life of the party, or just being present when I'm with people. But I could also opt to not being present when I'm with people. It really depends on how I feel. But overall, I really like to be alone, because I think it also has to do with the type of job, working one-on-one with clients. It's really intense, and afterwards I need time to process the work, and I love to be alone. Just put on some music and dance it all out, or be busy with cooking, and then I use all my other senses just to restore my energy. And I prefer to do that alone. But I also like it with one or two more people. Yeah, or just, you know, a bunch of people, maybe a handful of people with whom I feel that the energy is good.
Yeah, and I think it's coming back to that idea that we're not one thing or another.
Yes.
Right? It's just like, I think there's people who really struggle with being by themselves, right? And I think you and I don't have that struggle.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we also, it's no, you know, it's not an issue to be around people or engage with people and having these conversations that are very meaningful then as well. So yeah,
That's
I don't know, maybe I need to rethink, and also I'm an ambivert, but yeah, I think
could be. No, just talking to you about this, I think what you mentioned, that introverts, they restore their energy just by being alone, and extroverts, they restore their energy by being around people and having all these social interactions, like on the go all the time, right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I lean more into being an introvert because I restore my energy by being alone or with just, you know, less people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I can be, as a human being, in terms of behavior and communication, I can be extroverted.
Yeah. Exactly, and that again, that's the nuance.
That's the nuance. That's right.
We're not one thing, and we also it doesn't have to define you, right? It's just about preferences, but it doesn't. So we don't have to define ourselves by one or the other, but that everything is kind of on a scale, and you can be both. Yeah, that's then when it becomes interesting, right? The complexity of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And I'm thinking about your work, right? Because in your role, how do you find that the characteristics of being an introvert help you?
I think it's very related. So, I mean, the scientific background comes to mind here. Also, being an HSP and being an introverted person, noticing subtleties. And I combine that with having been trained as a scientist so often. I call things, that's my hypothesis, when I notice something, you know. I don't know if that's so much related to introvertedness as opposed to maybe HSP, so you notice something. But then as a scientist, we when we analyze data, or we formulate a hypothesis. And when I sometimes also call it a hypothesis, right? So I'm noticing something about a person or the energy that is different from the baseline. And then I'm like, so my hypothesis is, because then also you give yourself that idea, it cannot be true or it can be true, right? So I feel like that's an interesting, so I've started combining what I'm trained to do with the sensitivity, because then also it can be wrong as well, right? But then I think that's also an interesting combination of, you notice things, you make yourself aware that you notice something, and then also you fact check whether or not it's actually true, or and so that's then the scientific background, right? And you're not automatically like, I don't believe everything that, you know, or I question what is it actually that I'm noticing, right?
That brings me to that there are 4 types of introverts.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
tell me.
Yeah, because like listening to how you like deal with these subtleties, it's I'm thinking of it's a mixture of the thinking introvert and the inhibited introvert. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, the thinking introvert takes a lot of time just thinking, you know, and in that process you're introspective and creative.
Yeah.
And the inhibited introvert takes a lot of time taking a decision, you know, before getting into action.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a combination of those two.
Yeah, because I mean, I encounter a lot of people who are just very intuitive and then rely wholeheartedly on their intuition all the time, right? Like that's also very impressive, I find. And then I feel like I'm combining multiple things with also the training. And I think also being an introvert then is what I really like is that in COVID with the hybrid model, I think we're being given more flexibility, and I think that overall serves more people because, you know, for me, when you have to do something that requires you to think, or, you know, a more quiet space, then now, you know, you have that ability. to do so. And then, and again, we come in the nuance. So then, while as other times you have meetings and engagements. And so this is then the distinction. I think now COVID has broken open some old patterns we had. And so I really like that flexibility is there, because not one thing fits every person. Mm-hmm. And not one thing fits every person every day. And so I think this is has been an interesting development since then.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And well, you have mentioned two things which I find interesting. But okay, getting back to the COVID period, right? Mm-hmm. And that in that period, a lot of clients told me that they were so happy to be working at home.
Yeah.
Just because they were also like resetting their minds and their body also. They had more time to just take more time for other things around the job, like they could do their job more focused. Mm-hmm. And there was of course less social interaction. Mm-hmm. Like the talks around the coffee table, or just colleagues walking up to you with a question, so people were able to focus more, and that felt like a relief. And and then like gave back energy.
How is it now? Because I also noticed that I enjoy going back more, mm-hmm. right? Because it's like we reset ourselves, and then it's almost like, instead of like, well, it's every day, now it's like going back to the office and meeting the colleagues, because we couldn't, mm-hmm. is then also like, I feel like I also have more joy in that again. I don't know if that's also what you hear.
Yes.
But as opposed to, it was just, we broke open a habit, and then instead of just, this is what we do every day, mm-hmm. now it's actually like, okay, so I do enjoy then meeting people face to face again, and so on. So
and it
was a reset, almost.
Yeah, and it feels more like a choice then.
Exactly. Or also when you didn't have it, right? So it's a privilege.
Yes.
You don't notice privileges until you don't have them anymore. And then you're like,
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, like working as a scientist, that was the other part of what you mentioned, because you dove into noticing all these subtleties, and mm-hmm. that you needed time, to put it in place. Before taking action, or deciding what to do with it, but in terms of working alone and working with people, mm-hmm. like I can imagine that you have work that you need your focus and concentration for, mm-hmm. And you're trained to do that, right? To dive into the facts. But how is it like for you to also work with people, like in a team, as an introvert?
Yeah, I think you said it also earlier. It really always depends on the people.
Yes.
Right, like everything else, and you, and also on the days and where you're at, mm-hmm. and it's just it's always in flux, mm-hmm. and I think it's very, there is this. I expressed this one time. We talk a lot about what makes a high performing team. Mm-hmm. And we try to find reasons. And for me, it's always like, when you're on one. Does that make sense? It's like it's very hard to find the reasons and what makes a high performing team, and, like what needs to be in place. And there's so much research out there on mm-hmm. how to make, but basically there's a fundamental element of like, sometimes you just know you're on a high performing team, and mm-hmm. you're with people that, you spiral upwards, mm-hmm. and you work together really well, and you're really complementary, and mm-hmm. you, for example, the art of disagreeing in a respectful manner, mm-hmm. if that makes sense, like when you are in a team that can very respectfully disagree with each other, and then that disagreement just makes the discussion bigger, mm-hmm. and more and richer.
Mm-hmm. It does make sense.
Yeah.
And it brings me back to
and so sometimes we spend so much time of like trying to define what is a high performing team, and trying to define, but I'm like, when you're on one, you're on one,
Yes,
and it's like, I don't know, can we now define all the characteristics to reproduce it? But yeah, it's hard, right? That's a complex topic.
That's right. And again, it brings me back to the complexity of human beings with which we have started out this energy talk, because like I imagine you have been on a high performing team, right?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that there is a diversity in like how the brains operate of all these human beings within the team?
Yeah, and that is, I think, hard to pinpoint, because also, like, you know, when you're on a high performing team, you know you are on one. And then it's the diversity of thinking, and it's just you chime with each other. But then also, if you define one against the other, it may be different elements, and that's the complexity part of it. So that's there is, and I mean, complexity is also defined as such, as in like there's too many elements, and if you change one element, you do not know what it's connected to in other elements, right? There's a definition about complexity, and it comes from systems theory, actually. In systems theory, there's a simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And complex is basically like humans are complex, because you can be in a different mood every day. You can be, you know, there's too many things that it becomes not predictable. And so then you just have to go and find until you have a good enough. You can't solve a complex problem, for example. You can only manage it, right? And change something, and then see what is the impact of that change, and then, you know, until you have, you know, a good enough solution. And I think with high performing teams, that's exactly how it is as well, where I think I've stopped trying to define it, because you can't. It's complex. So there's too many elements.
Yeah, and we can use that theory that you were explaining onto dealing with being highly sensitive.
Yeah, it's complex.
Yes, it's complex. Yeah, because it's ever evolving. Like depending on the stage of life you're in, the different work or other projects that you have. The communication with your children, if there are any children, in the family, and it's about changing one thing and then see what the impact is of that change. Yeah.
And then for what this reminds me of is Daniel Pink has this book When. I really liked his book Drive, which was about what motivates people intrinsically. But then he also had a book called When, and it's about timing. And so what then statistically, you know, you can statistically then analyze if you have large data sets. So it's hard to predict one person, but it's maybe easier to predict statistically what a group will do. And he had this story about surgeons perform better in the morning. So if you have surgery, you want to schedule it in the morning as opposed to in the afternoon. So
thanks for the tip.
Yeah. Insightful, right?
Yes, insightful.
But also because everybody has a mid-afternoon dip, right? And so then, but basically they've studied a large sample, and then there is a natural rhythm, right? That does not mean that you cannot have a successful surgery, but basically if it's a complex one, maybe you want to schedule it in the morning as opposed to the afternoon. So yeah,
but that brings me to that, you know, people could be defined as morning people.
Everybody has
day
a biorhythm,
people, night
right?
people, and it's all different.
Are you a morning person or?
I'm definitely a morning person.
Yeah, so am I.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then later, so I that resonated with me when I heard like between lunchtime and like 3-4 p.m. that, you know, surgeons are performing statistically less good. Mm-hmm. So I was like, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but coming back like to you and your experience as a highly sensitive person, what changes have you made that stayed and of which you think like, oh, this really helped me to flourish as a highly sensitive person?
Yeah,
and being an introvert.
Yeah, I think looking at it as a gift. So everything can be a strength or a weakness, right? Mm-hmm. And then, for example, the sleeping. So finding that balance and also looking at it as a gift, and being susceptible and noticing nuances more, while at the same time also not expecting others to have the same view. Mm-hmm. And just to balance life to make it work, and so that it stays a strength and doesn't become into, you know, like when giving yourself that time to process. You know, when there's like the sleeping pattern, we have every now and then a night where we don't sleep and we wake up and something bothers us or is on our mind. But then when it's 2 or 3 nights, right, then I give myself a break. And so just like finding that balance then really has helped me, at least, to end writing and then really make time for that. I think that's the part, to prioritize making that time, and sometimes just that half day on a Saturday morning to not schedule anything and just be.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. It resonates?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I found out that I need to schedule me time.
Yeah.
Or me time is a bigger thing, but schedule pauses.
Yeah.
During the day.
Yeah. That's another good one, because I can push through, right? But then to learn also, you don't have to. And then it becomes a choice, because it's like, oh, I really need to finish this. And when it really needs to be finished, it's nice to know that you can push through. But then also to just stop and say, can I also do this tomorrow? And there's no impact. Then, you know, like giving yourself that, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yes.
And then,
giving yourself that space.
Yeah.
Because in the end, I do believe that we thrive most if we experience space.
Yeah. And we can't always be on, and we can't always be intense, and we can't always, right? And so I think that's also the tricky part with social media, isn't it? Because you're kind of always on. So I don't know about you, but I really, with COVID, I started to really pay attention to how much I expose myself to news and what news, and, you know, not to always read everything, because in COVID, right in the beginning, we just wanted to know, what is this? And then really to be like, okay, I can also just read it once a day in the morning, and then I know enough. Like, I don't have to all day. And I think with social media, I'm at least also the same way on really, I'm not on all the platforms, and also I really try to, time it or ration it, or, you know, like limit myself from, and then, you know, go out for a walk and remove yourself from it. I don't know if you also pay attention to these things.
I do, but in a kind of natural way, because I am on almost all social media platforms.
Yes.
But that's because of my work and my mission to spread information about being highly sensitive and all that, you know, relates to personal development and releasing trauma. So that's the way I use it. Let's put it this way.
Yes. It's part of your job.
I use it to share information. And
but you're not on all the time, are you?
No, I don't scroll.
Yes, that's a good one.
When I do scroll, it's maybe for less than a minute or maybe 30 seconds, and then I've seen enough already.
So do you have an internal stop gate almost that stops you from scrolling?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe after I've seen 3 posts or 4 posts,
you have enough.
Yeah, because it goes so fast. You know, there's so many. There's so much out there. There's so much information to digest, and just by doing my work, I'm already absorbing so much and processing and digesting. So yeah.
Well, and I like that, because especially because it is your job related, right? For me, it's a choice. But I mean, I can see how you can spend hours and hours on if you're not mindful of it.
Yeah,
and
right.
It's the mindfulness, right? Sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't feel like doing anything else, so you scroll. But then being aware, I only scroll that long or that much. And I think that I feel like that's where we are now headed, right? Realizing how much time you can spend on it without even noticing that the time is passing you by.
That's right. And also because there are many interesting, you know, people and stuff out there.
Yes.
Which you can follow or which you want to absorb.
Yeah. And that's, I think this is also where we're shifting. You're probably reading the same articles in literature about not managing your time as much as managing your energy, right? Because it's also social media, it's also you're spending energy on it, and then being mindful of, it's not mindless. It's you're still using your mind, and by scrolling and expose yourself to, you can do other things as well. That's when people say I don't have time. Is it really that we don't have time, or is it that we don't prioritize a certain thing? For example, when you hear I don't have time to exercise, is it really that we don't have time to exercise, or is it that I have not prioritized exercise into my schedule? I don't know. Do you notice this?
Yeah, I do. I do, and I'm thinking back to yesterday, because yesterday I had a full morning of seeing clients, and then I just knew beforehand I need some exercise. After having seen them, and today's the day, because yesterday I didn't do much, and so I just prioritized it just by scheduling it in my mind, like, okay, at 12 I will pick up my weightlifting, take it out of it, and then put it on the floor and just start. And it doesn't matter how long I will do it, it's about just
the habit.
Starting, just starting. And if it's 5 minutes, it's okay. Is it 10? Is it 15? And it took about, I don't know, 20 minutes. And then I was really happy, because it also helped me process the work that I had done during the morning. Yeah. So I combine it. So
I don't think anybody has ever regretted when you actually exercised, right? It's always do I have time? Do I want to? I'm too tired.
But it's also about planning, because food is also a part of your daily routine. And if you eat at certain times, your body gets used to that. Right? So if I eat a bit later, I'm telling my body, okay, I will exercise first, pick up my youngest, and then I will eat.
And your body probably knows it's time for eating.
Yes.
Because when you're in a habit of something, right, you just have go into routine. So it's good to have routines. It's also good to sometimes break those routines, to not.
But I think it all has a relationship. It all relates to one another, because if you don't give yourself the food you need, you get easily overstimulated. Especially as a highly sensitive person. Because you absorb so much information, you feel so much, and you need energy to process it, right? So sometimes these energy leaks start happening just because you don't take care of yourself well enough.
With exercise. And with exercise, and nutrition.
With food.
And I recognize that as well. Like you pay attention to what you eat. It already starts with, what do you buy? That's basically the easiest, right? If you only buy the things. And I do recognize that. I also grew up eating healthy. Like, I grew up in a household where, there was cooked food and there was vegetables and so on. And
where did you grow up?
I grew up in Austria.
In Austria.
And so so food was always an essential element, and also like eating healthy and eating salads, and so I think I feel a lot of joy like that as well, right? Because there's also others who are like, oh, I don't like salads, or I don't. And you can do so much. That's also the creative part with cooking. You mentioned that before. You can make a salad, or you can make a salad, and it can be, really good and really rich and really colorful, and that there's also, you can play with this. It doesn't have to be the boring salad. But I think it's also because, back to my roots, I enjoy that element because I grew up with it. It was a big thing.
It was a big thing. So
for you as well, right?
And then for a big part, it comes natural, to choose for the food that your body needs.
Well, do we choose, or did we? We were given the gift of, growing up that way.
No, that's right.
So I say that because I've lived in the United States for a very long time, where the eating culture is very different. And I think people then were exposed to different things early on in their lives, and then also that formed their eating habits. And so I don't know, that I have not read up on.
No, but were you able to continue with your healthy eating habits while you were living in the US?
So moving to Texas, where everything is bigger, including portion sizes. was a challenge in the beginning. But I think that, in the beginning, you just want to try out everything and you expose yourself to the new thing. But then, there was I gained weight. I think everybody does. But then it balanced itself out again, right? So because then it's just all new and you want to try it all. But then you go back to what you know. And I did adapt a lot. For example, I stopped eating bread and cheese. In the US, I ate very little. So when I moved here, I was like, oh, finally, cheese tastes really good. You can get everything in the US, but I felt bread was, you needed to go to a good bakery to buy the kind of bread that I'm used to, or we are used to in Europe. And I ate there's just certain things that my diet definitely changed there to what was available there. And there's certain things, cheese, when I moved here, I was like, yeah.
And you picked up eating cheese again?
Yeah, because it just tastes different.
Yes.
So, and I mean, I did not like it as much in the US. And so I ate less of it. And you can buy all the European cheeses and so on as well. But for the most part, it's just, so then your eating habits change in that way as well. What's available.
Yes, yeah. And if we're like deriving from food to other aspects of culture, like you were exposed to the US culture, exposed to the culture in the Netherlands, you were born in Austria. Like, how have you managed all these changes while being highly sensitive and an introvert?
I have honestly no answer to this.
No.
Because sometimes I think it's so funny how I'm lost about myself on not liking change and having put myself through so much change. I don't know. There was the opportunity to go to US and I didn't think much about it and just went. And I also moved in a random place. I moved to El Paso, Texas, which is to do a PhD, which is on the border to Mexico. And it was at the time, so now the border is more or less closed, but it was one city when I was there. And we crossed the border for lunch and came back in the afternoon to go back to uni and have lectures in the afternoon. And it is in the desert of Texas, and it's like you have the Mexican culture and the US culture kind of in one melting pot, and everything was so different.
Fantastic.
Right? And so
your sense of adventure and curiosity won from just not wanting to change, or that's a common aspect from being an introvert.
I think I had the opportunity and I just grabbed it. Then I think there's also we underestimate how adaptable we are as humans. This reminds me is Viktor Frankl. Have you read his book, The Search for Meaning?
No.
Have you heard of him?
No.
So he's an Austrian psychiatrist who is of Jewish descent and ended up in a concentration camp in Austria because he was Jewish. And he's very well known. So he was a psychiatrist and then ended up there. And then basically, so his philosophy is basically about people need meaning or purpose in their life, which is also very trendy again. And he describes in a very short book and his journey and what it was like for him in the concentration camp. And he survived it, but not without, he was, it was a very hard journey and also very hard to read. But he then also talks about how adaptable we are as humans, right? Like he survived concentration camp and in the Second World War, and then developed his theory of, that humans need meaning and purpose in their lives. And so, that resonated with me because I read the book the first time actually when I was already living in the United States. And it was interesting because it explains so much about Austria, right? He talks about the fact how after the war, not many Austrians talked about it. Some talked about it and some didn't. And of course, he was a psychiatrist, right? So he was trying to help people overcome this experience they had. And but then also that resonated with me in like we underestimate how adaptable we are when we are going through change, and I think that's something to rely on, right? So I cannot like change, but then also know that I will adapt to change as well, and not underestimating that adaptability.
And that's because of the strength that comes from finding meaning and purpose in life.
Yeah. And meaning, and so his story, of course, was so drastic, because you can also find meaning when you're stripped of everything, which he was in that, him and everybody else in the concentration camp. You're not stripped of how you think about it and your mind, right? So you still have control over how you think about it. And I think that was basically, for me at least, one of the lessons. Because it's also impressive, a person like that coming out of war and then being a psychiatrist and helping everybody else, having had possibly a more severe experience than other people, right? But that is impressive as well. But
I think also because of that, he had a really strong foundation to help people. Yeah.
Correct, and the empathy to feel with people.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but and I think this is a topic that we hear a lot, or I at least read a lot, the having purpose in your life, right? And so adaptability. So we came from change to purpose, but basically all the change that I've gone through is then you look back and you wonder, well, why did I do this to myself? But then at the same time, considering I'm not enjoying, but also then maybe,
But
so it's relative, right?
But I can imagine that you have replaced that thought, right? Like, why did I do this to myself? Like,
exactly.
Now it's like, oh yeah. I have lived.
And changing the language for yourself in like, I do not like change, to I'm very adaptable and I'll take this on too.
Yeah,
right?
Great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's also how do we talk about ourselves? How do we think about things, and reshaping those thoughts from a possibly negative one or one out of fear, as in like, I do not like change, right? Could be out of a place of fear, to be like, well, we'll tackle this when it comes along. We cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, and I really love the fact that you mentioned this, because some people, they have been feeling out of place for such a long time. They have like psychological issues, emotional issues, and they like long for a diagnosis. Like they want to have a diagnosis, because then there will be this sudden relief. Like, okay, I have been thinking that I'm going out of my mind, or I'm a crazy person. But yeah, if you're diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, like, oh, there's a name for it, and these are all the characteristics. But then coming back to your story about finding out how adaptable human beings are, how resilient people can be.
Yeah.
It's so healthy, you can make use of the diagnose in your own ways, but also leave some space to just embrace yourself for the person you are, and that you still have the ability to change and grow. If you want to, you can grow.
Yeah, I recently came across this podcast. I really enjoy it, from a woman who was in the Secret Service and protecting, and she was in 9/11, and she talks about you can also let go of things and not let them define you, because she was in 9/11 helping others. She was nearby, but then by mere luck, she calls it, escaped by the falling tower, not being caught up in that. So she survived. And she talks about it, and then she also talks about the fact that you can let go, and you can, this was a thing that happened in her life, but she's not allowing it to define herself. And I think this is what you're saying. People long to understand what is happening and long for a diagnosis, but at the same time, it's a choice to not let it define you, right? I'm introverted, but that doesn't define me. I'm an HSP, but that doesn't define me. And that is basically that complexity of not being either or. And I really like nuance, and I really like complexity for that fact that we're multifaceted, and then if you let yourself define by something, yeah, you don't, we
yes.
don't have to, right?
No, we don't have to. No.
And when you realize that it's a choice to not let it define you, right? So I can let that go. I had experiences and and then at some point, I'm letting it go. It's just something in the past that doesn't have to define me.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And like based on all the aspects that we have discussed related to being highly sensitive, being introverted, what would be your message to the watcher and listener of our Energy Talk?
I think exactly that. I think we're now in a period of time where everything is very polarized. You either for or against. It's black or it's white, and there's always nuance to everything, and that nuance can also be that's what makes life interesting, right? Let's not categorize ourselves and not categorize also others, maybe the even more important thing. And let's embrace that complexity and that nuance, because that's what makes life interesting, right? Not always knowing. If we knew everything that would happen, wouldn't it be boring? So,
exactly.
And then it's a
oh my God, thank you. Thank you for having shared all of your personal
stories.
For having me. And it was wonderful. And it's such a gift to the world, to hear you speak, and also your message to the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. And this was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.